All right, we are live on YouTube and we should be live on Facebook here. Give it another second or two. Actually, I'm going to adjust camera lens here a little bit. There we go. All right, we are live on both Facebook and YouTube. Welcome in. My name is Connor Riley. We're here to talk another Tuesday night of Georgia football. We just finished chatting with Kirby Smart, gave us some more updates as Georgia prepares for Tennessee this weekend. It'll be a really interesting game. Obviously, another top 15 matchup. Good to see a Green Soldier on YouTube. It'll be another top 15 matchup for the Bulldogs this week. They had one last week against Auburn. That obviously went very well, but I do think this Tennessee game, this Tennessee team is going to be a little bit more different. Philip Overstreet from Vidalia checking in. Good to see you. Welcome in. Welcome in. Give everyone another minute or two before jumping in and diving into main topics tonight. We'll look back on the Auburn game a little bit. We will continue to preview the Tennessee game and as well take your comments, questions, whatever you might want to know about the Georgia football program. Hope everyone is having a good Tuesday night. Daniel Aldridge, good to see you. Hope everyone is hanging in there, enjoying the football we've got so far. Saturday night was a lot of fun. Me in particular, I thought it would be a stressful, sort of tight game between Georgia and Auburn, and that was very much not the case. Georgia just came out, hit him in the mouth, and that game was over midway through the second quarter. So I think that's a very encouraging showing for Georgia, and they showed on Saturday why they are one of, in my opinion right now, the clear four best teams in the country. You know, I'll be interested to see what Ohio State eventually looks like, but I think there's a pretty clear hierarchy of teams that are already playing of Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, and if you want to include Miami in that mix as well, you can. Hurricanes have a big game this weekend against Clemson, and we'll see, I think, how real and legitimate that team is in that game. So, Houston Evans, status on Cook, day-to-day. Will we see him against Tennessee? I'm not sure. I think with that Alabama game the week after, I think they like what they have in the Georgia running backs right now. Kirby Smart did say on Saturday that if they needed Cook to come into the game, he could have. But when you have guys like Kenny McIntosh, when you have guys like Kendall Milton who are impressing in practice and looking pretty good in games too, I don't necessarily know if there's a rush to bring a guy like Cook back. He did, in my opinion, I thought he looked very good when he was on the field on Saturday, and that's definitely something that I think Georgia can use as a weapon going forward. 5 carries for 41 yards. That's a sort of yards per carry you want to see from a guy like Cook, along with Zamir White sort of being the more physical back, sort of wearing down the defense. It was a really good balance you saw from Georgia's offense there. But Cook could play, and it wouldn't surprise me, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Cook ends up not playing and we see a lot more Zamir White, Kenny McIntosh, and Kendall Milton. So without further ado, let's jump into tonight. We'll start with some of the stuff Kirby said. Talked a little bit about Tre McKitty. We just talked about James Cook a little bit. I am a little bit more optimistic that we do see McKitty this week. He's been practicing a lot more. He did dress out last week for Georgia. I think this is the week that the Florida State graduate transfer makes his debut for Georgia. And the tight end position has been pretty interesting so far with what Georgia's got. Obviously, John Fitzpatrick has the touchdown catch in that first game, had another catch or two against Auburn. And then obviously Darnell Washington is a guy who's made a couple of viral highlight plays already. He had the big catch against Arkansas to sort of kickstart that minute drive there before the half. And then to me, the most fun part of watching him is just level dudes in blocking. He did one against Arkansas. He had another one on the goal line against Auburn last week. And Noah Sheldon brings up, Darnell needs to be our number one tight end. I think eventually that's where they want to get with him. But the problem is right now, and this is sort of the thing I saw with him down in Orlando that Kirby Smart is sort of harping on, is just his conditioning. And it's sort of clear that and again, Darnell, first time getting adjusted to the college lifestyle. He was a guy who out of Las Vegas was just so far away better than everyone else in the field. Whereas now at Georgia, for him to be an every down player, he's got to be in consistently good shape. And based off what Kirby Smart has said, that's not necessarily the case. But again, he's a freshman. He's a young guy. And I think when you have an experienced guy like Fitzpatrick, a guy like McKitty who you brought in, I don't necessarily think there's this pressure to make him this number one star right now. Darnell sort of just needs to get his feet under him, get adjusted and acclimated to the college football game and lifestyle. And And from there, I think he'll eventually grow into a bigger part of this offense. But with what they're doing with him right now, where using him as a blocking tight end and occasionally running him out there in certain matchup situations, I think that's what you're going to see from Darnell this season. And getting that out of him, I think, is still a big win for Georgia. But as far as Darnell being the sort of Rob Gronkowski, even Arik Gilbert, focal point of the offense, I don't think we're there yet. I think Darnell needs to mature a little bit physically and get to a point with his body where he is in consistently good shape. And with a guy that big, it is not an easy task. Jordan Davis made it look easy given his weight. Weight has always sort of an issue with him, but Jordan Davis has done a fantastic job of getting in shape. And it wouldn't surprise me if 2-3 years from now, we sort of are saying the same things about Darnell Washington. So I know there's a lot of excitement there with Darnell right now, but it's going to be a process. He's going to make a few plays every week where you're like, wow, this guy, and to Noah Sheldon's point, this guy is clearly capable of being the best tight end in the country. But I think it's just going to take a little bit of time for him to get to that point. Let's see what else. Yeah, Philip Overstreet, like the way Kendall Milton looked. He really impressed me on Saturday. I was not sure how much of him we were going to see, just given how well Zamir and James Cook had been running. And, it's interesting. Tank Bigsby out there looked pretty good for Auburn in his sort of debut big freshman moment. But Milton was encouraging. It's the sort of stuff where, yeah, he's a big physical back, but he also sort of has that patience. There was that one run that unfortunately got called back for him, but he sort of just weaved his way through the defense. It sort of never really got knocked off course and kept his feet up and then picked up, I think, a first down for Georgia there. Those are the sort of things, and everyone sort of wants to – I see a lot of people are throwing out that Milton to Chubb comparison. That's Zamir White to me. And just White and the way he plays right now, he's always moving. He is tough to knock off his course, and that just keeps moving forward attitude, I think, is what I see. You see a lot of Nick Chubb, and hopefully he gets healthy very soon. Has a 6-week MCL injury, and I don't think he'll be out for 6 weeks. I think he might be back a little bit sooner than that, just given we know what kind of healer and rehabber Nick Chubb is and hard worker he is. So I think what you saw out of McIntosh, Dejon Edwards, and Kendall Milton, all very encouraging, I think, for the future of the Georgia running back position. I know I've written about it a couple of times this week. BA in recent years, Brandon Adams, he's harped on, well, you missed out on John Emery Jr., you missed out on Zach Evans, you missed out on Tank Bigsby. Nobody in this cycle really knows what Donovan Edwards, the high four-star running back from Michigan, what that is going to look like. So there's been a lot of, what does the future of the Georgia running back situation look like, especially given White and Cook can both declare for the NFL draft this year. Saturday night, especially in that second half when Cook didn't have any carries and White didn't have any carries either, between McIntosh, Milton, and Edwards, I still really, really like the future of this Georgia running back position and what they're going to be. And even you see the evolution with White this year under Tab Monken's offense. He's making big plays in the passing game. He had the one against Auburn where he looked like he was dead to rights for a 0 or 1 yard gain. Turns it into a 9-10 yard gain. And then last week set up the first touchdown, just goes out on a simple little angle route and turns that into a first down. So I like what we're continuing to see from the Georgia running backs here. It's a nice little evolution, both of the young guys getting involved and then a guy like Zamir White sort of adding to his game and what he's able to do for Georgia. So I think it's an encouraging sign for the future of the running back. And even though I will admit, and Thomas Gunn brings this up, Bigsby looked good on Saturday. And if I'm being honest here, Bigsby on that Auburn offense looked like the only guy that belonged on Georgia's team. I know I really like Seth Williams a lot, but Tyson Campbell, I think for the most part, did an excellent job of quote unquote eating his lunch and making things very difficult for, I think, a very good wide receiver. But watching that Auburn offense, the only guy that really stood out to me is a guy capable of playing on Georgia's team. And this is something I want you guys, Justin Tellis talked about this before. When you look at opposing teams, think of how many guys on that team would either start or play for Georgia. And the reality is for Auburn, I don't know how many of those guys there were. I think Tank Bigsby would obviously play. I think KJ Britt, the linebacker there, would play. Owen Popo probably plays. I think Seth Williams plays. But other than that, the talent gap between Auburn and Georgia is pretty wide right now. And I think Saturday night was a very clear example of that. And then sort of spinning that into this week, Tennessee, Been a lot of talk about the offensive line. They have a very good middle linebacker in Henry Toto. Excuse me. Some experience there in the secondary. But again, you look at that Tennessee offense, how many of those guys, I'll remove the offensive line, which we'll get into a sort of deeper look here in just a minute. How many of those guys on the Tennessee offense, those skill possession players, those quarterbacks, would play at Georgia? I don't know if the answer is one. Obviously, Eric Gray and Tyson Chandler, or not Tyson Chandler. I'm blanking on his name. The other running back there for Tennessee are obviously very capable backs, and Georgia knows sort of what they have in them. But at the same point in time, I don't think anyone would take Eric Gray over Zamir White. I don't think anyone would take Eric Gray over James Cook. So, yeah, Garrett Stone, the Bo Nix we saw on Saturday does not start for Georgia. Now, granted, Nix was running for his life most of the game, but Stetson Bennett was just flat out better than him, especially in the first half. This is sort of my main story from Saturday night, but when that game was still in the balance, when it was still in the first half, Stetson Bennett was 5 of 7 on third down for 81 yards. They got 5 first downs on those plays. Bo Nix was 1 for 5 for 0 yards. That first half, while yes, Georgia was making things difficult, and obviously Georgia has the better defense than Auburn, Bo Nix did not inspire a lot of confidence in me and sort of what he might be in the future. And they're asking him to do a lot right now, given the offensive line he is playing behind. So it was a very concerning day for Bo Nix for me. And I wonder if you switch Stetson Bennett and Bo Nix, if that game on Saturday doesn't look a little bit different, because there were times Auburn got pressure on Bennett, and Bennett, that first big third down conversion, he sort of spins out of there and hits Kyrus Jackson on a 17-yard catch. Jerry Popham, good to see you. So obviously there's going to continue to be a lot of talk around Stetson Bennett, but from what he's done second half against Arkansas and then on Saturday against Auburn, he's absolutely deserved the job, and I believe continues to start and continues to play a role in this Georgia offense going forward. It'll be interesting to see eventually if and what happens with JT Daniels as he continues to get healthier and healthier. I'll be interested to sort of see how this offense shakes out, especially after the Alabama and the Florida games, and sort of how that determines how Georgia looks over the long-term course of the season. There was one Smoke Dog brings up, we finally have a great OC. I have been very impressed so far in what we have seen from Todd Monken. I think he's done a great job of scheming guys open. I think he's done a good job of developing the weapons, the skill players, and putting them in positions to succeed, something I don't think James Coley necessarily did a good job of a season ago. For example, I don't think anyone could have ever imagined in any world or universe Kyrus Jackson having 147 receiving yards against Auburn, and that is exactly what Monken did with Jackson. I thought Kyrus was great on Saturday, and it's on player and coach. I thought Kyrus made big plays when he had to. He had a number of big third down catches. He obviously had the big 49-yard catch there for them, longest pass play of the game. But it's also consistently putting those guys in situations where they're able to make plays. You think of Zamir White, where the 2 pass attempts that really stick out in everyone's minds and what he's been able to do in that aspect. They put him out there on linebackers in one-on-one situations. He makes a simple cut and move, and he turns what should be a 2 or a 3-yard gain into a 9 or 10-yard gain. That is both on the player and the coach meshing together and getting the most out of it. So far, I have been really impressed with what I've seen from Todd Monken in terms of designing this offense and putting guys in positions to succeed. Stetson Bennett deserves a lot of credit for the way he has played, but I also believe that Monken is getting a lot out of Bennett and helping him out in terms of the plays he is calling and what in sort of the positions he is putting him in. And Kevin Steele is no slouch. He's a very good defensive coordinator. He is a guy I think is one of the top 10, certainly even top 5 defensive minds in college football, with just given what he's able to do year in, year out. And for Stetson Bennett to play as well as he did against Kevin Steele's defense, I think says a lot about what Todd Monken is able to do. And looking at the rest of this season, Brandon Adams and I talked a little bit about this off air today. I don't think Nick Saban is quite as involved in the defensive game planning, the defensive personnel, as much as he used to be. So with that in mind, this Saturday, Jeremy Pruitt is probably the best defensive mind that Georgia will face for the rest of this season. And Pruitt, whatever you might think of him as a coach, people who have followed Georgia long enough know that he is capable of putting together a very good and very talented defense from obviously his time as Georgia's defensive coordinator. So I think Pruitt is a guy who is capable of taking away something you really want to do and making life more difficult for you. And I'll be really interested to see how Stetson Bennett comes out and plays against this Tennessee defense, a defense that probably pretty similar to Auburn in the sense that, there's some experience, but there's clearly not the same top-end talent that the Georgia defense has. And there's a capable mind back there cooking things up with Pruitt and then their defensive coordinator, Derek Ainsley. I'll be really interested to see how he plays. I'll also be interested to see how the weather impacts this game. If it does rain like it is projected to, what does that sort of mean for Bennett in the passing game? I think everyone knows and saw last year the issues that arise in weather games. The Kentucky game was just critical low levels of fun for everyone involved. It was wet. Jake Fromm admitted he couldn't throw the football. He had no idea where it was going. If it rains like it did against Kentucky last year, it'll be really interesting to see what this Georgia offense look like. And I think if the game is a torrential downpour, I think that does help Tennessee a little bit in that it just sort of gums the game up for them. Ultimately, and we'll start taking predictions, questions about the game, what you're looking for against Tennessee, what I'm looking for against Tennessee. Ultimately, this just kind of smells to me like a game where both fan bases come away disappointed with how the game played out. I think it's going to be an ugly game. I think Georgia's going to win by 2 touchdowns. I had them 27-13, but they never really totally put Tennessee away, sort of like the South Carolina game in 2017. That was a 24-10 game. It's a game where, Tennessee obviously don't win, and it still doesn't look like they're all that close. But Tennessee simultaneously, I think there will be times where they make Georgia sweat a little bit, as they've done the last 2 years under Pruitt. I know the final scores show a little something different, but, Tennessee, especially last year in Knoxville, hung around in that game and made some plays. And Kirby Smart said tonight that the Tennessee game last year was better than the LSU game. It was obvious. The worst that Georgia defense looked last year. So I'll be interested to see what Jim Chaney has cooked up. I'll be interested to see how this Georgia defensive line, and I'm going to write about this both tomorrow and then sort of go a little bit deeper on a player on Thursday, how this Georgia defensive line goes after and makes life miserable for this Tennessee offensive line. Just given that's clearly one of the main talking points going in this week. Even if Cade Mays weren't eligible, I think this Tennessee offensive line is still a strength of its team. Having said all that, man, this Georgia defensive line is just so good and so athletic. You have guys like Jordan Davis, who's able to take up 2 blockers. You have guys like Trayvon Walker and Malik Herring who can set the edge for you and allow your linebackers to make plays. You have experienced guys and seniors like Devontae Wyatt and Julian Rochester. And then you have a freshman in Jalen Carter who's proven to be a pretty game-wrecking type of player, even as a freshman, just given his athleticism. So I know there's obviously going to be a lot of talk about Cade Mays, what he'll do, how that Tennessee offensive line will look. But this Georgia defensive line, it's actually, I think it's pretty clearly the best defensive line that Georgia has had in Kirby Smart's time here. And it's going, I think, to make things very difficult for Tennessee. And ultimately, I said this on Brandon's show today, to beat Georgia, you have to be able to run the football. In the 6 losses that Bulldogs have had since the start of the 2017 season, every team has run for at least 132 rushing yards. If Tennessee is able to get to that, I think they're going to be in a great spot to potentially win and steal this game. But ultimately, I think just given how good and how stout this Georgia front 7 is, I think that's going to be very difficult. And having said that and having that in mind, Tennessee, they're new. They're young at wide receiver. Marquez Callaway is gone. Juwan Jennings is gone. I would expect Georgia to stack the box a little bit more than potentially they would have a season ago and just say, hey, Eric Stokes, you're great. Tyson Campbell, you're great. And Tyson Campbell was awesome last week. I talked a little bit about how well Adam Anderson played. I think that was also probably the best game Tyson Campbell has played in a Georgia uniform. You have Richard LeCount and Lewis Seen, DJ Daniel, Tyreek Stevenson, Mark Webb. A very stout and standout secondary. Just say, hey, just lock those guys up. Don't let them do anything. You did it against, I think, a superior supporting cast in Auburn. You should be able to do that again against Tennessee this week. And if that's the case, especially on the outside, it's going to make life very difficult for Jarek Arantano. I think the one thing I want to see from this offense, and I don't need to see them be LSU, if they do what they did last week where they scored touchdowns early in the game. They were up 17-0. They were up 17-3, 24-3. If they're getting touchdowns in the first half and they're putting Tennessee in a hole, that's just going to make things so incredibly difficult, especially for a Tennessee team that hasn't run the ball a whole lot. Yes, Juwan Jennings is finally gone. I know it feels like he was there forever. He is finally off in the NFL. So if this Georgia team is able to score touchdowns in the first half and get up and get a comfortable lead on teams going forward, not just Tennessee and Auburn, but say like an Alabama or a Florida, and they are able to play to their strengths, which is in the second half of games, running the football and just relying on that defense to create pressure. Because again, you saw against Auburn, when you fall behind like that, you have to sort of abandon the running game. And when you abandon the running game, you're allowed to drop guys into coverage, and you're allowed to tell your pass rushers, Azeez Ojulari, Adam Anderson, Nolan Smith, Trayvon Walker, hey, pin your ears back, go get the other team's quarterback. And if that's what Georgia's defense is doing in the second half of these games, there's been a lot of talk BA and I have had and others about, can you win with a true defense leading the way, just given the offensive revolution in recent years. If Georgia's offense is doing enough in the first half to stake it to 2 touchdown leads, it might be enough, because this defense, in my opinion, is that good. We've seen that so far, and I think we're going to continue to see that throughout the season. I think you see it again on Saturday. I think this Tennessee team is really going to have a tough day running the football, doing much of anything. And obviously there's a lot of respect with this team in Jim Chaney. But ultimately, I just think this Georgia defense is just too good to lose to a team like Tennessee. So with that, we're about 20 minutes in. We'll probably go another 10 minutes or so. Open up questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, score predictions, what you guys will think will happen. Other SEC thoughts you've seen so far this season. I see Huckfin is in here throwing out Tennessee's going to win. I respect the troll move there. He says Tennessee's going to get 500 yards. There's no universe in which that will happen. So comments, questions, fire away. I'll do my best to answer them. Let's see. Yeah, Braves won today. It was a nice win to start the series. They're looking to advance to their first NLCS since 2001. You hope that they win against the Marlins, because that'd be a tough look if they do not beat, I think, a clearly inferior team. So, yeah, Smoke Dog brings up Kearis Jackson again. Kearis was outstanding, did everything you'd want him to, was huge on third down, really emerging as a player that looks like a consistent wide receiver, something Georgia. Dominic Blaylock flashed it a little bit, but Dominic Blaylock, and you guys know, regular watchers, guys who follow my content, there's not an analyst out there that enjoys watching Dominic Blaylock work and play more than I do. Dominic Blaylock did not have a game last year as good as what Kearis Jackson did against Auburn on Saturday. And if he's able to consistently do that, and part of that is teams are doubling George Pickens, but if Kearis Jackson's going to cook teams like that, you're going to have to start pulling guys away from George Pickens, and I don't think that's something you're going to want to do. And if Georgia gets to a point where it's true pick your poison for opposing defenses where, well, we either double George Pickens or we just let Kearis Jackson beat us all game, that's where you see things really open up, and it's going to make everything else so much easier. Having a second capable, competent, playmaking wide receiver out there. I thought Kearis Jackson, if he plays like that, obviously he's not going to get 147 yards every game, but if he's making big plays, big contested catches for Georgia in big spots, that's going to open up so much for this Georgia offense and really alleviate, I think, a lot of the concerns that still might linger about this wide receiver position. I saw Green Soldier. He asked earlier, who do you think is better, Auburn or A&M? At this point, I feel more comfortable betting on Auburn long-term this season than A&M. A&M had a lot of opt-outs right before the start of the season, and they didn't look good against Vanderbilt, and then they just got pushed around all game against Alabama. I thought that was a game they might come out and show a little fight. And what I saw was very concerning, whereas Auburn, I just think Georgia was a bad matchup for them. Getting them this early in the season, given they have to replace Marlon Davidson, Derek Brown, some of the real leaders on that defensive side, and this offense is still clearly, with the new offensive line, getting its feet under it. I think long-term, I still feel better about Auburn's chances this year than A&M's. And A&M plays Florida this week, and that's an interesting game there. They're hosting them. They're 7-point home underdogs. If I'm Jimbo Fisher, this is a game that would go a long way for me winning and sort of helping sort of reset the narrative of what A&M is and can be. So that's a big game that I would be interested in watching this week. A game I believe is at noon on ESPN, and then obviously the Georgia-Tennessee game is at 3:30. Yeah, Clarence Dawson, that goal line set with Jordan Davis at tight end and Jalen Carter at fullback. A lot of fun. Zamir White, the 2 times they ran it, walked into the end zone. There was another time I thought they should have done it again, and they threw 3 passes, and it didn't work. Mark my words, I think at some point this season, you're going to see Georgia throw to that jumbo set to either Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis, particularly Jalen Carter, just given his background as a tight end, as an athletic guy in high school. I'll have a story on him on Thursday about some of his just athletic feats over the years. But look for Georgia at some point to throw to that goal line formation. And if Jalen Carter gets his hands on the football, I pray for whatever defender is covering him, because trying to tackle that man will not be fun. Let's see. Yeah, Ryan Mooney brings up being healthy for that Alabama game. And, obviously you still need to win this Tennessee game. And like I've said, I think a lot of people think this Tennessee team is going to make Georgia earn it. It's not going to be a cakewalk. And because of that, I think it's worth monitoring a guy like James Cook. You say, do we rush him out there, or do we sort of see what we have in guys like Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh, guys who I think can be, and Kenny McIntosh already is with what he does on kickoff, contributors for this Georgia team. So I think it'll be really interesting to sort of see what they do with some of these injury situations. Tre McKitty, how involved is he this week? Especially when you have a guy like John Fitzpatrick who's producing behind him, and a guy in Darnell Washington who is making plays every week, just maybe not on the consistent conditioning level where he needs to be quite yet. Let's see. YouTube guys, let's ask some more questions. Too much bickering with Huck Finn. Don't let Huck Finn get over on you. Kevin Bruce Lewis, can I get your thoughts on Dejon Edwards? Yeah, running back out of Colquitt County, one of the, I believe, of the running backs in the room, and this just goes to speak to the talent there, the lowest ranked recruit. But I saw that guy play on Friday nights for Colquitt. That dude is a football player. He is a good player. Sort of similar to, I think, Kenny McIntosh a little bit, in that because of what he was as a recruit, I think a lot of people were maybe sleeping on him a little bit. I don't know if he has the long-term upside that, say, a Nick Chubb did, that, say, Zamir White does. But at the very least, see him being not a direct replica of Elijah Holyfield, but a guy who has to wait his time a little bit, has the guys who are about to graduate and move on, but a guy who, as a sophomore, as a junior, potentially as a senior, when his time is called upon, he is a productive player. You sort of already saw that against Auburn last week. I like what he can do as a pass catcher. I think it comes very naturally to him, and that's something where he's not as shifty as James Cook is, but he's a weapon in there, and you can tell already that I think he's very comfortable in that role. So I'm excited to see the future of what Edwards and Milton do together in the Georgia backfield, because I do think that they complement each other very well. Even if Milton and Edwards together long-term, or they don't have the long-range speed that some of the past Georgia running back tandems have had, Milton and Edwards on Saturday night against Auburn show that they are both going to be, I think, productive players for Georgia. Yeah, Jermaine Dunbar brings up, congratulations, Mark Webb, first career interception. We got to talk to him tonight. He was just saying the interception came because he was just in the right spot, and he's a guy who I think is a real key to watch Georgia in bigger games, because I think we saw a little bit last year, and I think in the Florida game this year, he might be the guy, and along with Tyree Stevenson, that gets asked to mark up Kyle Pitts. And if he continues to play well, and he's made improvements from last year to this year, and if he keeps making those, I think that's going to be a major key in how Georgia fares against Florida. Patrice Russell, I believe Carter's first name, the Carter you're referring to, is Jalen Carter. Let's see. Yeah, Shelton Tucker brings up, there's a lot of hype around this Tennessee team, but the reason I'm pushing back on it a little bit is they've beaten Missouri and South Carolina, and I think Missouri might be, if not for Vanderbilt, maybe the worst team in the SEC, and certainly based off what I've seen thus far, Vanderbilt played Texas A&M pretty well, so I'm not giving them a lot of credit for beating a bad Missouri team. I'll be really interested to see how Tennessee comes out and plays against a clear step up in competition against Georgia. Let's see. Let's go 2 more good questions before calling it tonight. Do I think JT Daniel, Lacey Miller asks, do I think JT Daniel sees playing time in this game? Based off what we saw against Auburn, I'm going to say no. I don't think this is a total blowout where it's 41-0 in the middle of the third quarter. And I think with the potential for inclement weather, I don't think that's a place where you want to throw out a guy coming off an ACL injury and getting his first real action at an SEC level there. So having said all that, if the condition, if it's sunny and Georgia's up big, the conditions are right, maybe I could see it. But it is also a little telling to me that when Georgia, that game was over and locked up last week, it's Dwan Mathis who came in sort of the mop-up duty to get more reps. I think the reason for that is they just want to get him more comfortable, because the biggest thing or the biggest concern to me with Mathis against Arkansas was he never looked comfortable. And if you're getting them those reps in a backup situation, I think maybe that helps him eventually get to that point where he doesn't look so jittery and it looks a lot more calm and collected when standing in there as the Georgia quarterback. So I right now wouldn't necessarily expect to see Daniels in this game. Let's see. One last good question. And then we'll call it on the night. Let's see. This doesn't count as the good question. Chandler Johnson asked about his throwing hand. Bennett's hand was fine. Just a little knock that I believe he hit it on a helmet. He's good to go, and I expect him to be the starter once again on Saturday. Let's see. All right, we'll go with this one. Green Soldier asks, how many turnovers for LeCount? I'm assuming that's in the season and not necessarily in this game, because I don't see Auburn throwing the football a lot. I think that the interesting thing with LeCount, he had 2 interceptions against Baylor to end the year last year. He had another 2 against Arkansas to start the season. With the way Georgia's cornerbacks play, teams are now maybe looking to attack the middle of the field more. I think you sort of saw that with Mark Webb and the way he got his interception, though obviously that was to the outside. But my larger point that I'm making there is these safeties are going to be the ones I think that come up with the interceptions, the star position players, for example, which would be Tyreek Stevenson and Mark Webb. Those are the guys I think that are going to be in position to make these interceptions, just given how man-on-man oriented Georgia is. So having said that, with LeCount, you look at a game like Alabama, I think that's a game where he could possibly get an interception. Look at Mississippi State, Florida. Those are teams that are going to throw the football a lot. That's going to put a lot of chances on LeCount's plate. So I wouldn't be surprised at the end of this season we see something like 5 or 6 interceptions along with a forced fumble or 2 from LeCount. Georgia's very lucky that targeting penalty occurred when it did, and it didn't happen in the second half. As far as the penalty itself, it's just kind of one of the crappy new realities of football where it fits the rule, but the intent was clearly not there. And, if I were rewriting the rule, I would say, well, if a player is sort of falling down and ducking his head into the strike zone where the intent was not there, the intent by LeCount was not, he was not leading with his head. He was leading with his shoulder. He was aiming to go right in the back, and the Auburn receiver was sort of falling down. I hope in the future maybe we get to a point where we're able to better recognize intent and say, oh, well, he's leading with his shoulder and the strike zone changed on him at the last second. We'll still assess you the 15-yard penalty, but maybe not eject you from the game. I think only true, like the Smoke Monday one where he led with his helmet. I think if you're leading with your helmet, I think maybe that warrants an ejection. But if you're a guy like LeCount who's leading with your shoulder, it's so hard to play defensive football these days. But, Georgia has him on Saturday, and I think he's going to play well once again. So, all right. I think that's going to do it. Jeff Binding asks progression of Nakobe Dean. He's looked very good. I think he needs to have a big game on Saturday. We got to talk to him tonight. If this Georgia offensive play, or this Georgia defensive line and this Tennessee offensive line can play each other to stalemates, I would look for Nakobe Dean to possibly have a big game tracking down the Tennessee running backs. They're going to want to run the ball. That's what Jim Chaney wants to do. He's going to try his best to put those Georgia linebackers in one-on-one situations, and I would expect Nakobe Dean to get a lot of those. And I would expect Nakobe Dean to win a lot of those. So that being said, happy Tuesday night. Tomorrow, Wednesday night, you've got Jeff Sentell with Before the Hedges, big recruiting update. Big recruiting weekend Georgia and Tennessee have a lot of interesting battles. We're about a week away from Amarius Mims' decision, 5-star offensive tackle. That'll be worth asking Jeff about. Thursday, we have cover 4, me, myself, Mike Griffith, Brandon Adams. Obviously, a ton of talk about with both looking back at Auburn and previewing Tennessee up ahead. Monday through Friday, you have Brandon Adams on Dog Nation Daily. Mondays and Fridays, you have Mike Griffith on The Beat. And then obviously after the game on Saturday against Tennessee, you have the Dog Nation postgame show with Brandon Adams and former Bulldog Terrence Edwards. So Dog Nation from a video content has a ton of stuff coming up. We have you completely covered from A to Z. Any questions, comments you guys want, feel free to ask away. My name's Connor Riley. Continue checking out Dog Nation. Have a great Tuesday. Have a great rest of the week. Georgia, Tennessee at 3:30 on Saturday. Hope you tune in.